Following on from the previous video, I'm just trying to show you different types of indeterminate forms, and we got to this stage here where if you look at this, if you have infinity over another infinity, you can't really tell which one's going to win. It is indeterminate. It really depends, because if this infinity is much bigger than this infinity, then you can say that the whole thing will head towards positive infinity. But then if this infinity here is much bigger than this infinity, then you can say the whole thing will head towards zero. So it really depends. Even though they're both heading towards infinity, it really depends which one which one's much bigger than the other one. If this one here is much bigger than this one, then the whole thing will head towards infinity. Even though they're both heading towards infinity, if this thing here is heading towards if this one here is much bigger than this one here, then the whole thing here will head towards zero, and it will probably head towards zero from the negative side. Well, think about it. And then sometimes you get this here. This here is not an indeterminate form, because if you have 0 divided by, well, if this number becomes very big, let's say 9999, then you can be sure that this will head towards 0. So this here is not an indeterminate form, whereas this one here, it is an indeterminate form, because you can't really decide which one, what will happen. Here you can be sure what will happen. This one is definitely going to head towards 0. So this is not an indeterminate form. Okay, and then if you look at this here, if you look at this as x tends to 0, so looking at this here, this graph looks like this. So as x tends to 0, so as x tends to 0, it is heading towards 1. So here you've got 1, and then here you've got 0. 0 over 1. Whenever you have a definite number and this here is 0, then you can say the limit does not exist, meaning it's going to do something like this. One's going to go up, one's going to go down. This one here, this is not an indeterminate form. You can be sure that the limit doesn't exist. Okay, so hang on. If you have something like this, if you try and evaluate the limit of this as x tends to 0 from the positive side, then this whole thing here will have a case where it's infinity take away infinity. So infinity take away infinity is another example of an indeterminate form, because here you've got one thing, take away another thing. Cotangent, remember tangent is sine over cos. Cotangent would be you going the opposite direction. It would be cos over sine. It will be cos over sine. Now as x tends to bear with me, as x tends to as x tends to 0 from the positive side, then this thing here will be 0. Will be infinity, because 1 divide, well, sine of x as x tends to 0. Remember, sine looks like this. As you head towards 0 from the positive side, you are heading towards 0, and then you've got 1 over 0. That will lead this whole thing to be infinity. That will lead this thing to be infinity. So infinity take away infinity, you can't really tell. You can't really tell. So this here is another example of an indeterminate form. Okay, so here, hang on. So here are some other ones as well. If you get a scenario where you have one thing, if this thing here is heading towards 0, and to the power here, this thing here is also heading towards 0, you're going to get another indeterminate form here. So because the reason why it's indeterminate is because you can't really decide what will happen. So if you have 0 to the power of a number, then for example 0 to the power of let's say 2 here, then this thing here is going to head towards 0. If you have 0 to the power of 0.00732 whatever, this thing here is heading towards 0. But then if you have a number here and then to the power of 0, let's say 0.0073 to the power of 0, then anything to the power of 0 will head towards 1. So here if you have one thing, so here you've got one thing heading towards 0. This thing here is also heading towards 0. Down here it could head towards 1. Here it could head towards 0. So again, when you have 0 to the power of 0, if you have one thing, if this thing is heading towards 0, this thing here is also heading towards 0, it is still hard to say what will happen. So this is another example of an indeterminate form. So here, hang on. So here's another case of where it's indeterminate. So if you have infinity, if you have a very, very big number to the power of another number, this thing here is going towards sorry, hang on, let's start again. If you have infinity to the power of 0, then it will be an indeterminate form. So here you've got something that's heading towards very, very, very big, and here you've got something that's heading towards 0. Whenever you get this scenario, it is an indeterminate form, because if you have a very, very big number, if you have infinity to the power of a number here, it will head towards infinity. But then if you have a number here to the power of another number, if you have a number here, and then this thing here is heading towards 0, then you can say that this here is heading it will head towards 1. So here it is another example of an indeterminate form. So here's another one. So hang on, let's look at 1 to the power of infinity. So 1 to the power of infinity. If you have one thing multiplying another thing, let's say this block here is heading towards 1. This block here is heading towards 1. This block here is getting very, very, very big. If that's the case, then this is indeterminate, because you can't determine what will happen. If you have 1 to the power of very, very big, then this thing here is heading towards 1. 1 to the power of very, very, very big is going to head towards 1. So this is going to head towards 1. But then if you have a number to the power of another number, if this thing here, this thing here is heading towards 1, but then if you have it slightly bigger than 1, and then this thing here is to the power of a very, very big number, then this thing here will head towards infinity. But then if b is slightly less than 1, let's say 0.99987 whatever, you can see that this block here is heading towards 1. But then and then this thing here to the power of a very, very big number, you can see that this whole thing here will head towards 0 here. So again, anything could happen when you have this scenario here. You could head towards infinity, you could head towards 0. This case here, you could head towards 1. You can't really determine much. You have to do something cunning. Now, at this moment in time, you don't fully understand this. You need to see some examples in order to fully appreciate this. But for the time being, just know that this here, you can't determine anything, you can't determine anything, you can't determine anything. So here's a summary of all that we've seen so far. You can have 0 over 0, which we've seen. We will now see some examples of this from now on. Infinity over infinity. Well, we will deal with this form later on. We will deal with this later on. We will deal with these later on. Okay, so this here is just a summary. Okay, so now our next step would be to look at in cases of infinity over infinity. Okay.